Welcome to Connect the Plots with Cylia and Erik, a podcast about the stories that connect us.
3, 2, 1, and we're live. I'm Erik Grove, and I'm a writer. This is my friend Cylia, and she's a reader. And today, we're joined by Misha Stone, a Pacific Northwest librarian that specializes in readers advisory. Misha, I think I first met you at NorwestCon a few years back. I know that you've been a fixture going to NorwestCon. How long have you been going to local conventions like that?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I remember meeting you, Erik. I'm a recent, convert to NorwestCon. I actually didn't know about it for a long time. Where I met a lot of community is at the Locus Awards that used to happen in Seattle every summer. It's where I met a lot of the people in the Clarion West community and Cascade. So Locus and then NorwestCon is where I have really met a lot of wonderful people in the field. And it turns out, love hanging out with science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers.
Is that Cascade Writers? Is that what you...
Yeah, that's one of the other sort of local
okay.
for writers. And I am not a writer. I feel like it is my job to celebrate your work. And so, like Cylia, I'm a reader, and I really feel like that's one of the beautiful things about the work I get to do is I get to meet so many authors.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to invite you to join us, is because we want to make sure, as we're talking about the influences and connections of story, that we understand that it's not just writers. So we have tried to kind of cast a wide net to bring in some writers, and in this particular case, I guess this means that you and Cylia get to gang up on me. So that works out. I think it has been more often the other way.
Love it.
It's all good. It's all we all take turns. Misha, one of the first things, and I met you at the 2025 NorwestCon, really we're getting a lot of pivot points in our origin story there. But the actual question I first want to ask you is the one we've been asking everyone as the kind of first meaty question, which is, what is in your book DNA? What are the stories that you first took in, whether reading or people reading to you or otherwise, that created the structure of who you are today?
Yeah, I love this question so much. And I took some time thinking about it, and I have sort of like 3 little kernels to share. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so one of the first, books I remember speaking to me vividly is Beverly Cleary's Ramona books.
Oh, yeah.
And in particular, I look back at the book, it's Ramona and her father, and she talks about wanting to stop the car on the bridge between Washington and Oregon and put a foot in each state. And that didn't actually happen. I thought it had happened, but she mentions it in the book, and her father says it's impractical. But for me, growing up as a child of divorce, shuttling between my house in Washington to my dad's in Oregon, that memory of reading that in the book, it felt like it emblemized my childhood, in addition to the fact that Ramona is incredible, just an incredible character.
I remember thinking as a kid that there was a magical line between Oregon and Washington, and was convinced that the Washington evergreens were more blue tinged than the Oregon evergreens, and you could not convince me otherwise.
This is a fantasy novel waiting to happen.
I'll give it to Erik, since I'm firm in my identity as not a writer.
Yeah. And then the next sort of pairing really are, how sometimes you get introduced to story because they were made into film first?
Yeah.
And for me, that was The Hobbit and Watership Down. And I had the illustrated version of The Hobbit that a teacher gave me before I moved across the country for 6 months in Connecticut. And then I remember in Watership Down, I used to pretend to be Bigwig at recess. I was obsessed with Dark Crystal, The Hobbit, and Watership Down. And, The Dark Crystal, I had the novelization. It didn't start as a novel, but Watership Down and The Hobbit, being able to read those later when those stories had meant so much to me in another form, those were really pivotal stories that I carry with me still.
Dark Crystal is one of my 3 core kernels, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And then my last one is thinking about the continuum of getting older and reading weirder stuff and more transgressive stuff was Anne Sexton's poetry. And
Ooh.
finding her books and reading her work too early, right? Like her fairy tale retellings are just so incredible and accessible and weird. And then my story too about like sometimes there's something that happens that makes you feel even more attached to an author, and there's nothing like a family member telling you that you shouldn't own that thing. So I had my stepmom found that book in my bedroom when I was visiting them for a summer, and she told me I should take it back home and never bring it back. She
This is this Anne Sexton poetry book?
Oh yeah, she was aghast. It was blasphemous. She couldn't stand the thing. And it turned out I ended up living with them. My mother had remarried and I ended up staying in that house. She forgot about it, but I never did. So, I still remember being, basically that's when someone challenges your right to read. And in many ways, it sort of crystallizes how important it is for you to have your own reading journey, and that you're going to read things that, might challenge other people.
Well, I mean, and you're kind of the dealer in that regard as a librarian. Like you're an opportunity for people to find access to books that they might not have otherwise found in the shelves at home. So.
Right. Well, it's absolutely true. And the thing that happens is that sometimes the things you're not ready for, you're not going to engage with, and there's always things that go over your head.
yep.
And so, there's something that's speaking to you in that work, but we all read a different book, and we don't know how someone else reads the thing in front of them. And I just remember finding Sexton's work and just being so enthralled because she was transgressive. Her poetry is so sexual. It's so sort of flies in the face of convention in so many different ways. And it wasn't until years later when I read her daughter's memoir, which is called Searching for Mercy Street, that I had to reckon with the fact that she was a complicated person. And in many ways, I related more to the daughter than to Anne Sexton herself. But I still come back to her poetry and look at what it did for me then and what it does for me now.
The book that I was told I should not be reading was Clan of the Cave Bear, and that whole series. I stayed with my grandmother overnight, and at every age, I must have a book to read, shut my brain down in order to read. And she's like, oh, well, this has like horses on the cover. Here, read this. I was between 10 and 12, and I brought it home, and my mother said absolutely not. She barely ever paid attention, but for whatever reason, she caught this one. And so for the rest of the summer, I would go to the library and sit in the quiet reader's room, and I got through that entire series just reading chapters in the reader's room, and then like bringing 10 to 12 books home, and then coming back and then continuing. I just read them chapters at a time because, and like you said, most of it either went over my head or I'm like, oh, I got to get through that part. Ugh.
Yeah.
To get to like the good part, which was all of the like prehistoric exploration and the sign language and all the other cool pieces.
Yeah. I have lots of feelings about you doing that in the library and like finding that space that you made for yourself when it was this forbidden thing, but you also felt absolutely drawn to that story. You needed to finish. You needed to know what happened. And those are big books. You were sitting there reading tomes in the library. That's amazing. Wow.
I wonder if all people in our country right now have like a story like this, where it's like the book that they were asked not to read in whatever way, like the book that they had taken away from them. For me, it was the early fantasy books that I remember having access to were loaned to me by a neighbor, and it specifically loaned me I think the first book in I forget the trilogy, but it was the second Dragonlance trilogy, the Twins trilogy, and I had it in my coat, in the jacket, like in the pocket, and I would read it on the bus. And I got to middle school in 6th grade, and I remember it fell out of my out of my jacket pocket because we had like hooks in the back, and my teacher found it and said, "You should not have this," and kept it in his drawer in that 6th grade classroom for well over a year. I later in like 7th grade, I happened to be in his class on an errand for another teacher, and as like a burgeoning, like small-time criminal, like opened up his drawer where I knew that he put all of his hidden stuff and found my book that actually was not mine, that belonged to a friend of mine, and was able to take it back. But he had like seized the book, and because fantasy,
You liberated it.
well, because fantasy literature was the work of the devil, and but I ended up taking it back. And that was like that's my version of, I guess, reading Clan of the Cave Bear in the library. Like my defiance to get that book back. I definitely read that trilogy, but I think I'd finished it before I got that book back. So I must have gone and gotten another copy. I'm not sure how that happened, but it definitely didn't stop me.
I think that this might be a question to add to your roster, which is, what is a book that was made clandestine in your life that you had to sneak, and what is that story for you? Because I think that unfortunately that's true for so many people.
Yeah.
That reading was something that was maybe not encouraged, in many cases actively discouraged, and it usually backfires, right? It usually means that you feel even more attached.
That my offspring is now 28, but I approach them so mindfully with this, which is no books are off limits, and there are certain books I want to talk to you about before you read them and explain why I don't want you reading them yet, and let's have a conversation about it. And then when they turn 16, one of the gifts was, you no longer have to vet any books in this house with me. You are now the ritual of your. There was also like a across the city puzzle scavenger hunt thing that I did with our chosen family friends. But like that was one of the major things was I trust you and your judgment now. You can read anything in this house.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that like having that conversation with them and being open to having it is really important. One of the series that my dad wanted me to read, but he didn't want me to read too soon, was the Stephen Donaldson Thomas Covenant series.
Oh my gosh.
Which, he loved it. He really wanted me to read it, but I think he waited to give it to me until I was 17, something like that. And I understand why. And that is that's the classic anti-hero fantasy, and he does some horrible things. And I don't know how I would feel reading it now, but I read it under the influence of my father telling me how much he loved those books. And consequently, I'd always favored white over like yellow gold as a result of reading those books. It's weird how little elements of a book will winnow themselves into you, especially if they meet you at a formative time.
There's a version of this of the like the restricted book angle that I thought was funny. Was Cylia and I recently went to a friend's book launch, and it's a horror book. This is for Laura Crane Hill's Wife-Shaped Bodies, and her kids were there in the audience during the book launch, and we're doing Q&A, and one of her, I don't remember if it was her oldest or second oldest kids, is like, "How old do I have to be before I get to read your book, Mom?"
And the answer was 18, because there's certain things that I don't want you knowing are in my head until you're an adult.
Well, I have a funny story. I know we need to move on, but I have a funny story with an author event. I hosted Joe Hill at the Downtown Library many years ago, and it was for, I think it was for Nosferatu. And he told everyone online, he's like, don't bring your kids because I'm going to swear a lot. All three of his kids were there. So I found it hilarious that online he was like, I'm going to swear a lot. Don't bring your children, but mine are here.
I just last night with my wife rewatched the early 1980s Creep Show.
Yeah.
That was written by Stephen King, and one of the bits of trivia that I did not know is that there is a bookend sequence at the beginning and the end of the movie with a little kid, and that little kid is Joe Hill.
No.
Yeah, Joe Hill's like acting debut was in Creepshow, and he's like, I haven't looked it up, but he's got to be like 8 or 9. And there were little bits in there about like how Stephen King in the factoids, because this has presumably come up for both of them as they've been interviewed over the years, about how they protected like where Stephen King drew the line about what his son was going to be exposed to on the set of this horror movie. You have parents have different lines, and you got to respect that. Like, I mean, presumably Stephen King vetted this with his wife, and they were both on board with like bringing young Joe Hill.
Well, and Tabitha was there that night with her grandchildren too.
Yeah.
So it was a cool evening for a variety of reasons.
Well, I brought my offspring to a couple different book readings, and the one I remember, I think, was Charles DeLint at Powell's at the tippy top of the City of Books, and it came to a question and answer, and they raised their hands and asked a very plot appropriate question, and they're like, Charles, the author, was like, "Oh, I did swears. I didn't know there were any kids in the audience." And without a beat, they go, "Oh no, it's fine. I've been in the car with my mom when she's driving." Just full on read to filth in front of tons of strangers. But it those were the kind of things, like, I didn't ever care about swearing aside from like, hey, don't do it at home. It's not really appropriate at your age. Don't do it at school because I don't want a phone call from your teachers. Like, that was not the stuff that I cared about, right? Like, that's not going to harm you. That's just a way to speak sassy out of frustration. But it is very interesting where people draw their lines, and when you start unpacking why, you really unpack a whole cosmology of what they think are causative versus correlative effects. So, speaking of causative versus correlative, what is your primary like ingestion method these days of books? Are you still old school hard copy? Have you moved into audiobook or ebook? And depending on that, does it change how you ingest a story?
Yeah, I'm super boring, and I'm still a print reader. I still really, truly love the technology of the book. I think that we forget it's a technology, but it is. And it's the simplest, most beautiful, elegant way to read if you have the ability to do that. I feel like I spend plenty of time on my phone and on computers, and there is nothing like stepping away and actually just reading the thing in print. It is taking a toll on my hands and arms. I mean, even just book handling as a librarian, that is one of those like librarians and arthritis. It's a thing. So at some point I may have to jump ship, and I wish, and I keep hearing how great audiobooks are, but I sing, and so I'm in a band as well, and I love to listen to music and read. And so it doesn't make sense.
Different parts of your brain.
It doesn't make sense to me to listen. I listen to short fiction, and some of the short fiction sort of like podcasts and recordings, and that's about the length of time I can do, but in general, print is really my jam.
I'm curious, when you're listening to music, is it with or without words? Does that
with words? I'm a weirdo, and I
No, I write my own books, and I listen to music with words, and I am on the far extreme of writers. Like it's not uncommon to find writers that write to music. It's pretty uncommon to find writers that write to music with words, and I almost exclusively write to music with words.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people with different sensitivities, and I know that many people can't create when there's too much AKA noise for them. But I also find, like, another thing that I find fascinating is that for me, there's also sense memory of reading a book, listening to an album. So sometimes you'll have connections of having read a thing while listening to particular artists, particular songs or albums in a way that is imprinting in a really beautiful way too.
We've talked about this.
2 follow-ups. First, what is your short fiction podcast recommendation, if you're going to give one to the listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good ones. I really need to listen to more, and I've read some Old Gods of Appalachia, Nightlight, which I listened to a lot when I was a World Fantasy Award judge, because that was one of the ones that we put forward and that did win a World Fantasy Award that year, and that is featuring Black Spec Fic. And then I just, as an absolute comfort, LeVar Burton reads. Just listening to that man read anything and just knowing he exists in the world just makes me a happy person.
And then probably where Erik was about to go, what's your favorite pairing of reading a hard copy book with an album?
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's maybe the one that kind of stuck the most. I remember listening to Songs from the Big Chair, Tears for Fears, and Psycho Candy by Jesus and Mary Chain while reading the entire V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic series. Like, there was something about that combination of, again, transgressive stories that everyone in my friend group was reading while listening to the music of the moment, that solidified that connection for me.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Erik, have you ever read Flowers in the Attic?
I haven't, no. I mean, I know that that's one of those classically transgressive books. I've seen the movie adaptation, which I can't imagine is the same experience. But I've seen one of the early one from the 80s. I think it's in the 80s. And it's pretty, I think I watched that particular adaptation with my mother, who had read the book, and she filled me in on anything that I was missing, plot-wise. From the book.
Content warning, guys! It's super fucked up.
Yeah. And I remember being really wary of powdered sugar for pretty much my entire adolescence after that. Like, I think it took me a really long time to get comfortable with the idea of like sweets with powdered sugar on them, because that's such a powerful association from the movie specifically. Presumably same for the book, but
Yeah, and I know I have, more current examples. It's just that's the one that, as we're talking about book DNA, and things that are kind of deep in there, those are inextricably linked for me.
Well, and one of the things that I think is interesting about Flowers in the Attic and Clan of the Cave Bear, and Clan of the Cave Bear has come up with some of our other guests. I know we've discussed it a little bit, or I've certainly discussed it with plenty of writers, because it's one of those books that was definitely in the zeitgeist in a certain couple of decades, right? And what's interesting is that the material in both of those books that were upsetting definitely was around sex. Like, we can't have kids reading anything about sex, but it was sort of. I remember both of those books. I never read them, but again, I watched the movie adaptations because my mom was a big fan of both of them. And I remember watching the movie adaptation of Clan of the Cave Bear, and again, getting like a little bit of the this is how it happens in the book kind of explanation. But it is like, obviously these books for a certain point in your life are fulfilling information and curiosity requirements that you're not necessarily getting other ways.
Right, and I never did read the Jane Aulds, so I don't have that as a grounding. Like, I knew that they were big, and I never got around to reading them. But I do look back at those V.C. Andrews books, which I just devoured, and looking at how many, and then looking at media at the time, and how many quote-unquote love stories were absolutely toxic and the opposite of love, right? Like, how often what you're being sold, and that certainly was insidious in different ways, but throughout the series, it's these siblings in love having kids. Like, it's messed up. Spoiler warning, this is an old series, but like looking back and realizing that what was packaged as a love story isn't a love story.
And super toxic family dynamics and trauma bonding
and so being able to go back and problematize, but also looking at where it fits in the through line of other stories that were also like very popular at that time, and examples of love that you're like, you know what, that was wrong, or that was something I'm trying to kind of like realize that media was doing this certain thing that now we're asking different questions and telling different stories now.
Well, it's so interesting because Clan of the Cave Bear, the only sex scene is sexual assault. Like, it's explicitly non-consensual in the text, and and a reason she leaves, right? Like, it's not glorified. And then Valley of the Horses is when the consensual sexual encounters occur, and they're written so differently. It's so clearly that it is consensual and two people coming together. And that was the thing that I just, even at 12 or 11, whatever age I was, I'm like, this is an important lesson for people to have. Why are you stopping this? Like, I just remember, I'm like, I'm not willing to have this argument with my parents. They're not there. And it was just like looking back at tiny little baby Cylia, who already was like picking her battles around like what she was willing to go to bat for, but still like having a clear, like, this is something we need to be talking to young people about, you guys. Is just, it's a whole a podcast genre in itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Misha, you are a reader's advisory. What does that entail? Like, what does that field look like?
Yeah. So, I work as a reader's advisory librarian with a team of other librarians who also focus on this work. One of the biggest names in the field, who is also a teacher of mine, is Nancy Pearl. And I now teach the class that she used to teach at the University of Washington. So I'm, having these conversations and working with future librarians to kind of continue this work, because it is a work that's not always seen in the same sort of like, echelons as reference and other kinds of work in libraries. Pleasure reading, leisure reading is sometimes looked down upon and not given the kind of credence it really deserves. And so, one of the things that you are working on continuously is just trying to really be as aware as you can be of the world of books, publishing, trends, and the ever-changing nature of reader interest, and looking at the deeper reasons that people love what they love. Mood can affect what you want to read at any given time, but books have their own moods, have their own, dimensionality in terms of how they're telling a story. They can be bleak, they can be uplifting, they can be both, they can be funny, they can be terrifying. And they are meeting the needs of those readers on an emotional and intellectual level. And so looking at those deeper elements of any particular book that goes beyond subject, right? So you're trying to match both what you know about those books, we can find out about them, and the reader in front of you, or the reader that you're making a list for online, and trying to make a match and help them have the reading experience they want to have.
So you say reader in front of you. Do you actually get a chance to sit down or interface with a reader specifically and give them that, or is that like an uncommon maybe every once in a while, or is that a day-to-day kind of thing?
It really varies. We work at a busy service point where we do get reader questions often, but they're wedged between someone wanting access to the restroom or where do I get this information in the building. So you are the concierge for the building, answering all number of questions, referring people to all kinds of other different sort of departments to get their questions answered, to get the resources they need. But in the midst of that, we do have people walking up to us all the time. I haven't read in years, or I have, I need some suggestions for my book group, or I need something for my mom who, can only read large print. And so you are working with people at various different, points of their life, wanting their next good book to read. And sometimes, again, you're working with readers who haven't read in years, are trying to discover who they are as a reader, and working with people who also may give you more sort of depth and breadth of what they enjoy, give you a little bit more, chewiness as you're kind of working with them in the stacks. But we consult resources, we work with them and try to help them find their next good read. And we do that in person. And in a given day, you can have maybe a couple, maybe more of those interactions. And that's the fun stuff.
Are you one of the librarians that creates those like little mini kiosks in the library that highlights a specific genre or whatever the theme is for the month, or are those as well?
I wonder what you mean by kiosks. There's different sort of options in libraries, but we do have displays every month.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so we as a team collaboratively work on that. We have people on our team that also make some of the cool decorations. I did a display recently of books by and about musicians. Let's see. I had fun with something else recently too. It's hard. I do so many, right?
Yeah.
We we try to be creative. If we have a smaller space, you can often be a little more eclectic, or if you have a bigger space, you're trying to like find a wide range of things. But we also have semi-permanent displays where we always have queer authors on display, Black authors on display, and romance is huge right now. Seattle just opened 3 romance bookstores in the last year.
That's so cool.
I have a colleague who just created a horror section because horror is so huge right now, and she did tremendous work to make that happen. But yeah,
Where was the horror section filed previously?
well, we have not had a new genre section in the 20 plus years since I'd worked there. So it was just integrated into general fiction. We have mystery, science fiction, fantasy. We used to have an old Western section that didn't really ever, they stopped growing after a certain point. So we had to make a case for, hey, it's time to really embrace this moment and make a horror section. I hope someday we can make a romance section as well. There's a lot of complicated factors in terms of cataloging, stickering, all of that. Whenever it's not as easy for us to make those things happen as it is in a bookstore, but it's well worth it so that readers really feel like, there's a space for them.
So if somebody walks in and or walks in or emails, you said you deal with some people in person or sometimes.
Yeah, we do personalized reading lists online as well.
So as an example, do you have like a series of questions that you go through to help guide you towards recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's the optimal, like if there was nothing else going on in the building, if there wasn't someone collapsing in a corner and something wild going on, which I would, but we, so when I teach, I give them all kinds of sets of questions to use. Most of the time, really what you have is how much time do they have to work with you? How much time do you have undistracted, uninterrupted? But we start with open-ended questions like, tell me about a book you read recently and why you liked it.
Okay.
What did you read recently? What are you in the mood for now? So we ask questions to get them talking about their book DNA. Like, what are the books that really speak to them, and how do we find that next thing that they'll really love? And sometimes you'll get a lot of detail, and sometimes you won't get a lot. And you try to tease it out as much as you can and give them an experience where you hope they'll come back, share more. And then when you give them things, you also say, come back and tell me even if you didn't like this, I want to know. It's not about making me happy. I'm trying to make you happy and help you. I mean, I think that one of the things that's true in libraries and that we forget, people are intimidated to ask us for help. And our collections in and of themselves are intimidating and overwhelming.
Because people will go in and they'll see like just a general fiction section and there'll be umpteen hundreds of books and they won't necessarily know where to start. Is that what you mean by intimidating?
Yeah, I mean, how do you find, when it comes to fiction, think to yourself, what do you love, okay? Right before I got here, I think you guys were talking about dragons in space. But how will you find it? How will you find it? Like, it's just overwhelming to be faced with these shelves with mainly spines and not knowing where the stories you might really connect with live. Because not every book in that collection is going to be speaking to you.
I mean,
I think this is illustrating how far on the Cilia's different curve I am, because like if you could unpack my brain when I walk into a library or a truly enormous bookstore like Powell's, there's like the golden shaft of light that comes out of nowhere because there's no windows, and a chorus of angelic singing, and it's just like I get excited the more things I don't know are there. And I think Erik and I definitely differ in terms of like, when I find a book that I really, really love and then I find out it's part of a series, I'm like, yeah, like I've got so many more left. And then Erik was telling me the other day,
it's not that I'm not interested in books that are part of series or books that sort of like open, like I think for me, I change dramatically between every book that I read. Like I don't like the one book. I don't like the book that I'm reading right now to be too much like the book that I was reading before. I like to cycle and have variation. And I think the challenge with a large series or maybe not even just series, but like books of a kind, whatever that kind is.
Yeah, they're similar. Yeah.
Right. But whatever that is, I think that I don't want to continue to read the same thing over and over and over again. And often, like the series that I do go back to, there are some of them that I love, but I go back to them as sort of comfort reads, and so I maintain, like, I'll leave books and later in the series so that I know that they're there for when I'm gonna have, like, if I'm having like a really rough time, I know that there will be a book that I can go and I can find, and it will always bring me a certain amount of joy. So
like
there's like
little treat.
yeah, but I mean, it is sort of like a in a weird way, it's a psychology of reading scarcity, right? Like, what if I don't, like, what if this is the last book that I've, that I get a chance to read for a while for whatever reason? I want to make sure that it's something that's going to expand my horizons or give me immediate comfort. I don't necessarily want it to be so similar to what I've read before, but
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so it sounds to me that series are not what you gravitate to most, and that
no,
you like to have a distinct experience with each book you read.
yeah,
That's information. You've given me information about you that I might use to really like pick at what, if you're wanting to also not have the same reading experience, I would still want to know what, like, give me some bookends. Like, what are the parameters for you about, like, what you are willing to explore, so that I can figure out what you might enjoy next that, again, isn't so like the thing. You're looking for distinct and dissimilar reading experiences.
yeah. I recognize that I may be atypical, and part of that I think is because of the writer's perspective, because I also write this way. So whenever I'm writing a book, whatever it is that I'm writing is probably very different from the thing that I had just written. When I was younger, it was almost like a little bit of a superstition for me, where I would, to evade the possible threat of writer's block or stagnation, I would switch. So when I was in like my early 20s, I would switch between short stories, poetry, playwriting, screenwriting, novel writing, all sorts of different genres, and I would just keep pinballing off of them because I felt like at the time, one, I didn't want to calcify my perspective. I didn't want. I remember, like, it was not meant in a critical way, but I took it as a criticism that stayed with me now for over 20 years. Having somebody in a creative writing class go, "Well, this has a very Erik voice," and then I was just like, "I don't want to have a very Erik voice.
Don't pigeonhole me.
I want my voice to be different, and I want my reading, And so, like, in all of my reading and all of my writing, I'm always looking for the ways that I can constantly push, to go for that new and different area.
Well, that makes me think about, I mean, I know this is going to air later, but, one of the things that just happened that's so exciting is Daniel Kraus winning the Pulitzer.
I haven't read that one yet, and I'm so excited to read it.
But this is also an author that, for one, to finally see a genre writer win an award of this kind. But also he's someone who likes to challenge himself, who writes different books each time. And I think we can think of authors that do that in a way that is really exciting. That they give us some of what we already sort of know and love of them, but in ways that are really pushing the boundaries of what they've done before. But that it is really lovely to see, again, an author push themselves in a direction that they hadn't gone before, and it get the kind of notoriety that it's now getting. So happy for him. And I was thinking, Erik, about and I don't know how you feel about this, Cylia. It's like I also sort of went away from genre reading for a good period of time, and then came back to it. And so there are a lot of ways in which, like, I have been made more aware of all the biases that exist in, like, the way that people read, what they see as worthy of reading, worthy of attention, worthy of awards. And in Reader's Advisory, it really pushes you to also just be as open as you can be to figuring out how to serve many readers who are so not like you. So you always have to be open to that.
What's the book that brought you back to genre reading? Do you remember?
I think it was more than one. I think it was definitely more than one. I think probably, honestly, one of the, like, real sort of, like, the series that really got me back into it is Lois McMaster Bujold's For Kosygin Saga. I know, right? Like, that is a series that is different throughout it, although there's some sameness, but she tries a lot of different things in that series, and the characters grow and change. And I don't think I'd seen anything previous to that which explored a character growing and changing. A lot of series, the characters are more static. You're seeing them react to things, but it's not the same thing as being impacted and changed by them. And Miles Verkosigan and Cordelia Verkosigan, for that matter, are both just incredible characters in the field for showing change and evolution and growth in characters over time.
Well, and I don't know if it's canonically the first, but it was definitely the first time I ever saw something about uterine replicators in science fiction. I'm like, yeah, why don't we have those? This is ridiculous.
Right. But that also, choice is so important. And, Cordelia makes the choice she makes, which, has deep effects on Miles. So it's interesting too, just to look at all of the things she's asking questions about that are still pertinent and relevant today.
Misha, do you find that in your position, kind of so close to the readers, so close to the books, that you are anticipating things that become a more mainstream later on? Did you see romantasy and the big romantasy boom coming? Like, how did that look from a reader's advisory perspective?
I wish I'd seen it and I didn't. No, I really feel like everything is going in, there's so much happening all at once when it comes to this work, is that I wish I could tell you I saw that horror was going to come back. I wish I could tell you that I saw that queer romance was going to be a big thing. I look over the course of my career, and like Devil Wears Prada coming back, like chick lit was huge when I was a new librarian. That's a term that we don't use anymore, but that was like a big boom. Then it goes down. Urban fiction was huge for a long time. It's less of an ask now, but those writers are still doing their work. All to say, like, when you're in the middle of it, you don't always see it happening, or you don't always know what's going to hit. And book talk has further complicated what becomes big in a way that is really not easy to track or even like predict.
So book talk started in 2020, if I remember correctly. Like, that's when it started like hit critical mass.
Yeah, but it's done weird things since its inception, which is it's launched old stuff like, out of print titles and like, backlist, while also like driving things like romantasy. So it's hard to know why and who gets traction. But yeah, I think that the advent of horror and romance also could be predicted, given that there's been so much stress in the world. And these are, both feeling genres, and they are really meeting a moment that maybe we could have foreseen, but when you're in the middle of it, you don't always think about how the book trend. And the other thing too is that like that book was written 3 years ago before it gets published.
The author and the editors don't necessarily have a clue.
It's that's one of the other things that like you hear in terms of like telling authors not to ride trends, because once you've tried to write it, it might be done. I just write the story that is like really speaking to you.
What is an example for anyone who's like, I'll dip my toe in romantasy? Like, what would be a good representative book that you would recommend to someone who said, "Hey, I'm open to romantasy, hit me"?
Great question. And I don't read enough of it personally, and I'd have to do some research. I can give you names.
Okay.
Carissa Broadbent has been writing romantasy for a long time. Is it Jennifer Armentrout, who has also been writing romantasy for a very long time. And then many people are coming back to some of the, like, Kushil's Dart. Jacqueline Carey is coming.
Yeah.
Like that is a book that is a precursor to this that I would also suggest to some readers. But I would really kind of want to know more about like what elements are important to them, if they're wanting something really spicy or something more plot and character driven. Because Kit Roca, like, totally, like, the Dragon Thruple books. Those are great. But is that a starter? Not sure. It depends on, you know,
And
what
how
you're...
dark do you want it, right? Because Kushiel's
Right.
dark gets a little dark,
It
which
is
also
dark.
makes me think of the Anne Bishop Damon series.
Mm. But, you know, one of the other things that is true of romantasy right now, and I would like to see change, is that there's not a lot of representation. So sometimes a genre or subgenre will boom, and it doesn't mean that there's enough diversity in author voice in the field yet. And so that's something I'd like to see more of over time. In horror, the opposite's happening. We're just seeing so much more representation, so many queer authors of color coming into a genre that historically they were not as welcome in, and that's really been lovely to see.
And a representation there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like
Is
what's
your question,
a good? Go ahead. Erik.
Yeah. So an author that's local, Washington State author, that I just read her new book, which is, hang on, this is I'll Watch Your Baby. Nina Viel. So her first book, her debut, is called Listen to Your Sister. And it is about 3 Black siblings in Seattle. And I've never read a horror novel that is about the horror of being a parentified sibling.
Woo! It's too
And
real.
it's like, I know. And she does it brilliantly. And then she said, you know what? On my next book, I'm going to tackle something that I thought we wouldn't still have an issue with: welfare queens. So, like, I'll Watch Your Baby, her book that's coming out in May, is about welfare queens. And she takes a real interesting lens on that. It's definitely got some really interesting things to say around America's history, who's, you know, seen to be sort of like taking advantage in society and so on. She's just really amazing. So Nina Biel for sure. Gosh, there's just too many.
Didn't Chuck Tingle come out with, aside from the self-published stuff, but like got trad published some horror books?
Oh yeah, so Chuck Tingle, Camp Damascus, I think was sort of one of the first, and then gosh, there's the one that he just did, Bury Your Gaze, which has Misha as a main character, by the way. Yeah, he's wonderful. I mean, you know, you gotta love Chuck Tingle. Love is real. He's killing it. But you know, you've got Eric LaRocca and Haley Piper. And I mean, one of my absolute favorite horror writers right now, and if you really love the written word, is Cassandra Khaw. Like, their writing is bonkers, weird, and beautiful and gross all at once. Just off the charts. Amazing.
So we're going to talk about this in a talk back, but one of the long-running pieces of this season is Erik pointing out that, or either trying to get me to like horror or get me to admit that I'm already reading and liking horror. And I realized after I finished it that the library at Hellbore that I just finished is horror. And I'm like, oh wait, Erik, I just finished this. I think it might be horror. And he looks it up and, yep, sure it is.
I mean, that one doesn't even try not to be. I would say that if you've not read The Salt Grows Heavy, oh, that is such a beautiful... It's about a landlocked mermaid and a non-binary plague doctor, and it is so filled with pining. It is so filled with pining. Cassandra Khaw, they're amazing. But yeah, Library at Hellbore, that's horror. And you know, it is testament to the fact that like you're reading books that you may not even know are in a genre, because the genre is vast and there's so many different interpretations of it.
I was like, oh, it's dark academia. That's fine.
Yeah. And have you read any T. Kingfisher?
All of it, basically.
Yeah. It's horror. A lot of it is horror. But she's so funny and so brilliant, and you feel like you're hanging out with your snarky friend every book. Like, adore. Yeah.
What do you read? Like, if you were just going to pick something up, or maybe the last thing that you picked up that was not, I don't know, a required reading for some reason or another, that was just on a whim that you picked up, what would you mention?
I read all kinds of stuff, and I do feel like because the work I do requires a recency bias, I do try to read older stuff. So here's an older weird one I picked up. Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls came out in the 80s. British writer. It's a slim little novel about a woman who falls in love with a sea creature. Larry has been escapes from this facility, walks into her kitchen, and they start a love affair. She's like hiding him in the guest bedroom. Her husband doesn't even know. It's this weird, like, I love like a little literary novel that's like unabashedly weird. So that was great. What else? I'm reading, one of the bigger books this year, and I do feel like it's like phenomenally written. It's a debut, Whidbey by T. Kira Madden. Yeah, she's a Hawaiian author, native indigenous Hawaiian author, and this is a book that is heavy in theme, but it's so well written. And then another book I just read that I really am still thinking about is The Hospital at the End of the World by Justin C. Key. I met him when he was a Clarion West student while he was also still in medical school. And this is a novel about AI and also the medical world, and also about the ways in which sometimes we don't know about our parents until, and the secrets that they maybe haven't told us until they're gone. There's so much going on in this book. I loved it. I'll stop there. That's some recent reads. I mean,
you've just added several books that I desperately want to read, so I appreciate that. I feel like you've got both a forward-facing eye and you've got a different perspective than I can. My reading process is dependent upon libraries because I almost exclusively read books based upon when my holds come in the library. And I just put in holds based upon recommendations. So probably at the end of this, I will go into my library app and I will put in 2 or 3 holds based upon some of the books that you've mentioned. And then based upon what order they come in is when I will read them. Because it's the only way, it feels like it's the only fair way for me to decide what to read next.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and I admit to being like impatient, and I do buy a lot of books, even though I should be waiting for my library queue. And we do have a fair amount of things that are recent that are there available to check out, but sometimes I just don't want to wait.
I'm always. It will be well out by the time this episode comes out, but I'm always shilling the fact that you can get a voter's packet. Even if you don't show up or attend in person, you can sign up for a supporting membership for WorldCon and get an e-packet of books and have pretty like this curated list of not just novels, but it's often the primary short stories I read because I'm not naturally drawn to a lot of short story magazines, which is a great way to get those into my brain. Misha, the thing I'm trying to do this season is build a reading list for Erik that fills in this like donut hole he has of genre that was published in the 70s to 90s range. If you were going to say like, hey, you really, you already brought up Vorkosigan Saga, but like if you were to think about like a real classic or fundamental piece of science fiction or fantasy that came out in those decades, what would you recommend that Erik read?
What decades again? Sorry.
70s, 80s, 90s.
I feel ill-equipped to answer this too. I also feel like I have big gaps myself, but I would say, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. I would say either Man Plus or Gateway by Frederick Pohl. I would say, you got to read some classic Le Guin if you haven't already. Dispossessed and Left-Handed Darkness, Lady of Heaven. And then John Wyndham. Have you read any John Wyndham?
I have not.
The Midwich Cuckoos. The Chrysalids.
The Midwich Cuckoos, like, there's a direct through line to Shannon Maguire right there. Like, she's critical of Wyndham, as you might be, but she loves him.
and that's like also the combination of science fiction and horror. That's absolutely Shannon's sweet spot too. But yeah, Day of the Triffids he also wrote. There's something about his work that's really like accessible. And then you got like Walter Tevis, Man Who Fell to Earth. I don't know. I know I'm missing major things because I also had to do reconnaissance for myself because I hadn't read them until I was an adult. What would you add?
I mean, I am consistently adding. I feel lucky in that I never drifted away from genre. When I first found it through Anne McCaffrey and her Harper Hall trilogy in 5th grade, and my grandmother, my stepdad's mother, was a librarian at our small local library, which is one of the reasons I couldn't check it out and then hide it because my grandmother would see.
Yeah.
But like I distinctly remember this split level on the left side of the library and down the stairs, and that was the westerns and then all the science fiction fantasy, and I just basically blazed my way through it. So Asimov, Frederick Pohl, Fred Saberhagen's Sword series, a ton of Mercedes Lackey, of course, Anne McCaffrey's Pern. I mean, most of the purchases were from like the 70s and 80s, and I was reading it in the early 90s, and so it was really like a primer on classic science fiction and fantasy.
I have one more that I feel like it won awards, but I think it's underread in some ways. The Snow Queen by Joan Vinge.
Oh, that's one of my heart books. I love it so much. Joan
I
Vinge,
know.
I'll get her every single time. Oh,
I mean,
she's
so good. That is just like, in terms of a book that you can also just see the future and the future of fantasy and science fiction. It's such a beautiful blend, and it's so well written.
Her and David Brin, I really felt like made me really interrogate my idea of sentience and like the corporal body, and like Glory Season by David Brin is just so fantastic. And yeah.
So I had the experience of trying to like drill down what it is that I like and sometimes don't like about genre fiction, because I started reading a book and there was a stretch of it that I just didn't not like, and then I got to a stretch of it that I really did like. And being able to, within the same book, recognize like where it was that my attention was waning and when it started to pick up, kind of for me brought into focus what it is that I do enjoy about reading and what I don't enjoy about reading. And I think that what I don't enjoy about science fiction and fantasy is when I feel like I'm getting a tour of a world rather than having like an emotional connection with a character. Like I am a feelings, like you mentioned, horror feelings books, and that makes sense to me because I am a feelings writer and a feelings reader. So I always bring the feelings into science fiction and fantasy, and I always look for science fiction and fantasy.
So the 3 chapters on like how the space drive works.
I will put the book down. I will just straight up put the book down and walk away. Like I'm sorry. It just is not. It's not.
And this is not exclusively science fiction or fantasy.
No,
issue.
no, it's
Most
whatever.
Exist, right? I mean, like,
Well, and for me, so I went through it, and I haven't mentioned this to so maybe this is gonna like start like a new controversy. I stopped reading fantasy entirely for about 2 or 3 years, and it was specifically 2020 and 2021. I just could not read fantasy. Like whenever I tried to read fantasy in 2020, 2021, I just was like, this does not connect with me to the world outside my window. I cannot read this. Like it just felt wrong. I had the experience of watching a Wes Anderson movie. I generally like Wes Anderson, but I watched one of his movies that came out in 2020, and I just was like, why are you doing this? The world is on fire. Why are you making this right now? Like there was a sense of urgency and anger and pain that I had through those years that I was not finding in fiction, or specifically fantasy fiction, and it was partially because I was not finding the right for sure.
Right.
I was not finding the right fantasy fiction, but the fantasy fiction that I felt like was being kind of shoved
Served
at
up.
me, like on the main shelves at the bookstore or like on a lot of the lists. When I would explore them, it felt very escapist. It felt like it was interested in like these matters, and I'm like, the world, and again, the world is on fire. Like the world is on fire, and the problems that I am experiencing are not the problems that I'm engaging with in the book.
That's fascinating, because I was literally the opposite. Because I was working in healthcare, I was designing the clinical physician schedules for what if the worst happens. And the last thing I wanted was to deal with it once I was done with work. So I was going 100% for escapist fantasy, because I'm like, I'm full up on the realism. I've just dealt with the realism all day. Please hide me. I need to refill my cup.
This is testament to how you can really be in a moment in very different ways and need very different things in your reading life as a result of that. I guess what I'm wondering is what did work for you?
Ultimately, I think it wasn't even it was reading stuff that was more fantasy horror. I think, in fact, I think one of the first books that I read that went like, okay, and it brought me back was Ring Shout by
P. Jelly Clark.
Yeah, okay. So I read that and I loved it so much that I was like, it was like I got a sense of taste back again. But that is arguably more horror, but it definitely, like, it's kind of cosmic horror. I don't know. But whatever was going on in that book was like I could taste food again.
Yeah, I think like one of the things, I also stopped reading lit fic for a little while because it just wasn't doing anything for me. And one of the quotations I keep coming back to, and I could not read this book, like Marlon James and his, fantasy, I just couldn't do it. I tried, but I love every interview he's done. And here's him saying, the kind of realism that tends to predominate in literary fiction is, quote, as fantastical as sword and sorcery, James told me. The quote, the world of a lot of these novels is super white, super middle class, women only appear in a certain way. That isn't real life. There are black people on Nantucket. We've given social realism this pride of place as the thing with the most verisimilitude, but there's more verisimilitude in Aesop's fables. Literary writers don't get to talk down to sci-fi about invented worlds, right?
Yeah.
And so I know it's a New Yorker interview. It's so good. I have this in notes because I used it in a talk I gave. Because I feel like sometimes literary fiction doesn't even meet those moments where, like, a lot of it wasn't speaking to how weird the world is. Like, and science fiction and fantasy sometimes have been able to do that.
Well, it's been able to engage with truth through allegory in ways that sometimes real world fiction is dodging.
Right.
I remember having a similar, like, because I used to read a lot of literary fiction and drifting away from literary fiction for similar reasons that I drifted away from fantasy, which is that I wasn't feeling a connection or an emotional validation, and I for sure wasn't feeling like it was necessarily representing the world that I experienced. And the author that brought me back to literary fiction, and part of this is that my personal background is growing up in a very poor, very rural part of the state of Oregon, and I have it makes my heart go pitter patter when I read a writer that can write about the experience of growing up lower income in a respectful and honest way, and in a really experienced way. And so the author that I read, and it's fucked up, and in a lot of ways it falls into a lot of the stereotypes of literary fiction, but it was Willie Vlotten, who like, I just loved how real and like, I don't know, maybe I've asked some of our guests before, like, do you go to reading? I had a literary mentor, a writing mentor, that suggested that readers go to books to encounter catharsis or like conflict or a challenge. They want to read a book and they want to have their worldview shaken up. And I've countered that with, like, sometimes you want to go in there and you want comfort. I'm starting to realize that there is a third branch. There's probably more than three, but there is a third branch of this, which is looking for validation which is different. It's somewhere in between. And for me, some of the authors that were writing stuff that made me feel like a connection, a validation between what they were experiencing and what maybe I've experienced or what people that I know have experienced made all the difference. And I think I don't feel validated when I read about people that are in a fantastical world having experiences that are so far removed from my experiences or the experiences of my community. There are exceptions to this, but it was definitely one of the things that I found. There's so many exceptions to this, but it was one of the things that I felt like was sort of pushing me away from genres, is when I don't feel validated or
Yeah, and that makes me think about the ways in which, again, all these conversations around representation and the need for it is because readers are seeking this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And too much of their lives have been spent reading books, characters, and authors who didn't care about them.
Yeah.
Who never considered them, and one of the books that I feel like does a really brilliant job of interrogating this is, it's called How to Read Now, in which she talks about being a queer woman of color, and like she was the unexpected reader of most of these works she read all her life. I'm having a little blank on her name, even though I've read everything she's written now. But yeah, I mean, and like, we do often want to see ourselves mirrored, reflected in some way. And, Elaine Castillo is the name of the How to Read Now author. But like, one of the reasons I love those Ramona books so much is that they talked about the struggles of being in a family where money was really tight. Like, that's brought up in almost every book. And there's so few books that actually, I think for any age, that actually reckon with that wrestle with that really have, like, one of my favorite, two of my favorite books that are like, I consider sort of like working class and struggle novels, but in a brilliant way. Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter, which is also set in the Northwest, and is also about incarceration. And then Last Night at the Lobster by Stuart Onan, which is about a crew of people working in a restaurant during a snowstorm in Connecticut. Like, he gives so much dignity to those people working in this Red Lobster. And I'm like, I remember working at a Skipper's, my first job in Salem. And like, yeah, those characters were so familiar. And Stuart Onan, who's often called a bard of the working class, who wrote a book with Stephen King, by the way, on baseball. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful writer. And he's just someone who again and again continues to write about everyday people, working class people.
What was the Willie Vlotten book, Erik, that you would recommend?
So the one that I read that was the first of his that I read that I really enjoyed was Lean on Pete. And I don't know why that one particularly struck me. I think it's probably because the main character is an adolescent going through like a particularly difficult time. But there was something just so beautiful about the language. I mean, that's the other thing that I look for in a book. Like, if you're not going to write a book that's gonna make me stop and like want to repeat lines or whole sections over and over again just for the sheer, like, for Willie Vlotten, I think there's like a starkness, but there's like a stark power to it. Vlotten, which kind of pivots me to something I wanted to ask Misha about. Vlotten is a musician. Like,
I was going to say,
yeah.
I think I knew that.
Yeah, so he's a lead singer of a band.
Yeah.
And there's something that he brings, I think, to the work because of that, like, sparseness and sort of the vibe of music. I have told people, and this is an accurate statement as far as I'm concerned, that Cylia is always asking me, like, what are my book DNA influences, and I have, it's a very shifting answer, but I will say that my writing influences are actually more music, and like I learned a lot from music, comic books, and movies. Like I learned a lot of visual communication from comic books and movies, but the progression and the emotional connection of a good song, I think, is an underrated place to begin studying the craft of storytelling. Like, there are albums where, like, whether or not they're supposed to be like a concept album and they have like a story from beginning to end, that you can feel the dramatic progression as the album is going, and you can identify, there's like an art form to this, and this is my old man yelling at cloud kind of rant about, like, most of us are consuming music by streaming apps, which are pretty ambivalent to the album constraint, like that collection. But I still really, really like to listen to an album in order, track one through track whatever, because there is a progression and a storytelling that happens. As you mentioned that you were also a singer, how do you relate storytelling to music or vice versa?
I'm still new to being in a band. I've been a karaoke singer for years.
Right, which again, I've had the yeah.
That's another space of catharsis, honestly, and connection. But music absolutely tells stories, and I also really love those songs that are stories. Like, we went to go see the artist CMAT, if you know who she is. Mm-hmm. She's an Irish sort of like pop and country singer. But she has a song that I've done now twice at karaoke called "Lord, Let That Tesla Crash."
Oh, God.
Just listen. She can't perform that song live because she will break down. And if you listen to that song, you'll know why. It is it is a brilliant encapsulation of what songs can do, the places it can take you to, and how it can just gut punch you in unexpected ways, right? So, I mean, I think that to some degree, our brains don't even know the difference between how we're intaking those stories. Mm-hmm. So there is sort of like an admixture of, like, we're reading the story, we're listening to the story, we're listening to a song. And that's why sometimes I do, again, really enjoy that process of reading while I'm in a room with music, because it complements the feeling and the experience I'm having, where sometimes the messages that are happening, whether or not you paired them, because you could pair them. I mean, gosh, I bet there's like ample need for services like this. Like, I had a student actually propose this. Like, what if someone said, here's the mood I'm in, give them a book, a movie, and an album?
Yeah.
People would pay for that, because sometimes they want to be transported, or they want a full sort of stereo experience, because we are influenced in story through so many different mediums.
Well, if you look at the structure of songs, right, like the verse and the chorus and the verse and the pre-chorus to chorus to the verse to the bridge to the verse, like that is such a classical story structure with the climax and then the denouement. Like, there are certain ways that I think humans need structure to ingest narrative, and I think that is a through line through movies and comics and books and songs, because all of it is still hitting that part of your brain which says connection through story.
Yeah.
I think that there is a purity of emotional expression that you can find sometimes in music. Maybe it's because of that immediacy, like either you're experiencing the music as if it's live. So maybe similar to like a performance on stage, like an actor, but there is something about the vulnerability that you have to have in order to sing. Like even karaoke. I love karaoke. I think all three of us are fans of karaoke, right? So there's something deeply empowering and also sometimes deeply heartbreaking or whatever emotion to sing a song, and give it like the purity of that emotion. And so I often think about that when I'm reading a book. Like, could this, like, what is the song version of this story? Like, how would that hit me? And I think about that when I'm writing. It's like, what is the 3 to 7 to 9 minute, like long song that carries the emotional arc of what I'm trying to talk about.
Well, it also, occurs to me as you were both talking about this, and like song structure, and also that feeling piece of our reading, is that you can tell when someone isn't being fully vulnerable. You can tell when the story hasn't maybe sort of like coalesced in a way that its emotional truth is like visible or felt. And maybe that's what you respond to, Erik, that sometimes you pick up a book and you're like, there isn't enough emotional truth in the way that this story is being told. Because if an author doesn't really go hard, doesn't really like open themselves up, if somebody's up on stage and doesn't give a song, sings a song flat, doesn't even get into the emotional resonance or the tonal qualities that that story and song deserves, you can feel it. And it's execution matters. And so sometimes those story beats have to be also delivered in a way that gets to something that is meaningful.
One of the things that I will tell writers when I'm doing a workshop or I'm teaching a class is write to the level of vulnerability that makes you comfortable, and then see if you can push that and be more vulnerable, just a little bit more. Like go up to your comfort level and then experiment with tilting over the edge.
Explore that growth edge.
Explore where you're at when you're, you're like, wow. Because, it's not a hard and fast rule. It certainly isn't, because I've written sad scenes where I've been, perfectly fine, but like you can tell when somebody's not pushing hard enough on a particular on some writing, and I am always on board to push it harder, get closer to the emotion of the scene.
Right. Or sometimes and it's you can never really know what is going on for an author and why they show up in one way. One of the things I think about is like Patti Smith's Just Kids, if you've read that memoir, which is the first of a series of memoirs she's now written over the years. But that is a memoir that I feel like is so vulnerable and so rich with sort of emotion and intellectual inquiry and interrogation that I have not found in anything else I've read by her. I feel like she went so close to the heart of herself in that one. She's always keeping something back in everything else since. I haven't read the most recent one, but I've read almost everything else she's written in the memoir form since that one. But that one was just so incredible. And as someone who's a songwriter and a poet, and it is remarkable when you look at the scope of someone's work, and you can it's like the beginning of The Body by Stephen King. Sometimes where someone's secret heart is buried, and that can just the fact that someone actually had the audacity to share that with you, but you can tell sometimes when it's maybe not present in other work in the same way.
Misha, we have so enjoyed our conversation with you today. I'm forcing myself to wrap us up here because I literally just want to come over and put on some music and talk about books with you for another couple hours, which none of us have time for, and makes me want to do this again. If you're going to leave our listeners with anything else moving forward, what would you encourage them to do or read or listen or watch?
Oh boy. I would just say ask a dear friend or someone in your family, ask them what they really loved recently, and read adventurously. Try something that you would never have tried. Open yourself up to new kinds of reading. I don't know. Talk to your local librarian. We'd love to help you too.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Misha. This has been a pleasure. Again, just like Cylia, I feel like we could keep going for 2 or 3 times as long. But we'll go ahead and leave people and us wanting more. So thank you so much. And until next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Connect the Plots with Cylia and Erik. Thanks. Please connect with us on social media. We're Connect the Plots Pod on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. You can also support us and gain access to exclusive content on our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/connecttheplotspod, all spelled out. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.